One of the things I learned was that the artist is at the center of everything. There was an architect and a divan, and he said, don't ever forget that the artist is at the center of everything. And everything else is ancillary, and you're there to look after that. Even though I consider myself an administrator, I really feel that my role is to ensure that everything that's happening is happening for the artist.
Welcome to Platemark, a podcast about art and ideas. It's our framework within which we can talk about any number of topics related to art and art history, prints, and printmaking. We're talking about the world of fine art prints, by the way, not posters or other images printed digitally for mass consumption. Just want to make that clear. My name is Ann Schaefer, and I'm an independent curator specializing in prints and printmaking. If you are just joining the Platemark family, know that this is Series 3, in which I and Series 1 co-host Ben Levy talk with luminaries of the print ecosystem. Over the course of these episodes, we'll talk to artists, master printers, print publishers, administrators, directors, gallerists, art historians, curators, and paper conservators, as well as other people who are invested in the success and evolution of prints and print publishing. There are 2 other series for you to explore. Series 1's goal is to demystify the intimidating marble temple on the hill, the museum, and to humanize curators. We're all people, after all. Some of us just have had cool jobs. Series 2 makes the case for printed images as a critical part of our shared history and shared visual culture. That series is a history of Western prints, beginning with the first press and continuing to today. I know a podcast on art history is counterintuitive since images are integral to the entire pedagogical enterprise, but fear not, I've collected all of the images featured in each History of Prints episode and have included them in each episode's show notes over at platemarkpodcast.com. Along our chronological trajectory, True Ludwig and I have reached the 17th century and Rembrandt van Rijn. We're taking a summer break, so I'm introducing the aforementioned 3rd series. As I said, the 3rd series focuses on the colorful characters that occupy the print ecosystem. If you know me, you've heard me say that print people are the nicest people in the art world. And am I biased? Yes, definitely. But all of us, I'm one of them, of course, are eager to educate and share our passion about art. Prints seem to be a bit intimidating for people. The technical aspects can be involved, they can be complicated, but as I have said over and over again, once I get you over that speed bump, there is a wonderful world waiting for you. So I've asked people from various parts of the ecosystem to talk with us about their role and their work and their part in that system. This first episode of Series 3, I am joined by Ben Levy. We had the great pleasure of interviewing Paula and Russell Panczenko in person at the conference of the Southern Graphics Council International in Madison, Wisconsin in March 2022. Paula is the director of Tandem Press, a self-supporting entity affiliated alongside the art department within the School of Education at the University of Wisconsin at Madison. Tandem Press works with an international array of artists to produce fine art print editions. Russell Panczenko retired after a long tenure as the director and chief curator of the Chazen Art Museum, the Museum of the University of Wisconsin at Madison. Let's dig in and hear what they have to say.
Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Ann Schaefer, and I am the host of Platemark, a podcast you can find almost anywhere. I'm here with my co-host, Ben Levy, and we are at Southern Graphics Council International in Madison, Wisconsin.
And we are honored and thrilled to be interviewing Russell and Paula Panczenko.
Today, we're talking to Paula Panczenko, who is the director of Tandem Press in Madison, Wisconsin, and has been since 1989. And Russell Panczenko, the retired former director of the Chazen Museum at the University of Wisconsin, and was there for 33 years.
This live recording is the kickoff of Series 3 of the podcast. Series 1 is Ann and myself broadly speaking with each other conversationally about art and ideas with a somewhat printmaking focus. And our colleague True Ludwig are thoroughly walking through the history of Western printmaking, artist by artist, in series 2. And in series 3, we're inviting people in and interviewing them with the broad narrative of the print and art ecosystem. I think one of the things that is true in all forms of artistic practice, but especially true for printmaking, is that there are so many people involved, and that pulling the curtain back on all of those people and all these different roles only makes everything more rich for the viewer, for appreciating what they're looking at if they're standing in front of a work of art, knowing that them standing there looking at that work of art is the result of not only an artist in their studio, but historians, curators, collectors, dealers, printers, arts administrators, and all that. Your careers could be broadly categorized as arts administrators, and I was curious if you could briefly talk about what that is or what that means.
I was the chief curator at the Chazen as well as the director. And that's very important, especially to me, because I got into museum work because I was an art historian and I loved art. And the worry was that if you go into administration too frequently, you have to do more and more administration. You get further and further away from the art and you assign it to other people. One of the nice things about staying in a university museum, you can stay close to the art. And that's what I did. Now, printmaking, most university museums start with print collections because they're accessible financially, or the art department gets prints. They don't know what to do with them, and there's a gallery gets set up and are transferred over. So all university museums have a great commitment to prints and the collecting of prints because that's how they got started. Prints were always a mainstay for the Chazen, and I was always involved. I always loved the stuff.
Well, I did my degree in art history and archaeology, and I definitely have an administrative background. My very first job, which was supposed to last 6 weeks, was running an arts centre in the south of Ireland, the Wexford Arts Centre, and then I went on to work for the Arts Council of Ireland, and I stayed there for almost 5 years. And then I had met Russell in Italy, where he had done all his graduate work. And then I came to Williamstown, Massachusetts, where I set up Ireland America Arts Exchange, because I was still very focused on Irish art. I basically organized an exhibition of contemporary Irish art. I invited Lucy Lepard to select the work because I felt nobody knew who I was, but if I got somebody well known, people would go and see the show. That was very good, and I set up a program at PS1. They had an international studio program there. But at the Arts Council, one of the things I learned was that the artist is at the center of everything. We had a fantastic board. They were all elected to the board by the Prime Minister. And I remember there was an architect, Andy Devan, and he said at the first board meeting I attended as a staff member, don't ever forget that the artist is at the center of everything. And everything else is ancillary. And you're there to look after that. I think that even though I would consider myself an administrator, I really feel that my role is to ensure that everything that's happening is happening for the artist. And I became familiar with printmaking in Ireland through the Arts Council because we had several places where they were really printmaking cooperatives and printmaking studios, and I knew a lot of printmakers. But then when I came here, and after I finished working with Ireland America Arts Exchange, I worked for the Wisconsin Arts Board, which was very, very administrative. And the job came up at Tandem Press. I've been there ever since. And the museum is also the archive for Tandem Press and receives one of every print. And it wasn't too difficult to course the director about buying monoprints or single prints, because you had a lot of time to do it at the end of the day, and you could also keep on at it. So
You can either buy that monoprint or get your own dinner.
really,
But the Chazen also takes in the matrices, right?
yes.
All of them? Some?
No, just the interesting one.
Ooh.
Oh,
Well, when I talk about an interesting one, I mean, sometimes if you're doing wood blocks and so on and so forth, they're fascinating, and etching plates. And if we did, one of the very first things we gave to the museum was a William Wegman dog, and it was an etching plate, and it was just so typical of his work. And of course, they could use it as a teaching tool. So yes, we do.
Do classes? We talked to James Nguyen, the print curator at the Chazen yesterday for a little while, and talked about the classes and working with the students and faculty. Do you guys also run a class situation at Tandem? Or is that a part of
Well, we
its
do
work?
workshops in the summer, which we started doing in the last 3 or 4 years. But we invite the art department to bring their classes over, and there will be demonstrations. So that happens quite a lot. But more recently, we have done actual weekend courses, but not anything to the extent of other presses. I mean, there are many other presses that spend the whole summer doing it, whereas we seem to undertake the projects that we've undertaken are very elaborate.
In earlier episodes, Ben and I have often talked about in a shop where you're trying to edition something, if an artist comes into work for 2 weeks or whatever time period they've set, all of that editioning stops because everyone's focused on the artist. You have to catch up at some point, right?
Right, but when an artist comes in, for example, Judy Pfaff is coming into Tandem on Monday, we take down absolutely everything belonging to another artist. We say it's your studio this week.
Wow.
So we don't do anyone else's work. But we plan it out that way. But in the summertime, we're having courses and maybe having 10 people in. That would be very distracting to a visiting artist. So
Sure.
but Crown Point Press does brilliant etching workshops all summer long. And I think they do it for almost 2 months. We have not gotten to that stage.
Part of what I love about the print ecosystem and the print shop situation is that everybody has their thing and their specialty. And you just said, hey, you should, if you're interested in an etching class, you should go out to San Francisco and see Crown Point. I love that.
Yeah, no, it's true. I mean, our staff has gone out to Crown Point. They've, asked me, can they go out there? And I'm like, of course. And actually, the International Fine Print Dealers Association did a fantastic series of talks during COVID. And they did tours of various print studios. And I said to our staff, and they haven't taken me up on it yet, that they should go to see Neil Borsch's studio.
Yes.
I thought that was my.
Yeah, that was a good one.
And he is such a nice person. I've met him at print fairs. And everything is huge and very exciting. So I told them I'll send you over.
I think the IFPDA should organize a travel program where you could go around to all of the contemporary European shops together. And I think I'd go.
Yeah.
Let's do it.
Okay.
Okay.
Maybe we could suggest to them a substitute of visiting print studios as over yours. Good idea.
I think so.
Well done.
All right. Thank you.
I wanted to back us up a little bit. One of the things that's always shocking to me, having been in this field for not a short amount of time at this point, that I'm still finding out about jobs that exist. There's still aspects of our world that I go, oh, that's a thing that someone does? And that's one of the drives of trying to flesh out this ecosystem for our listeners. But another aspect of that is that everybody comes to this world in such wonderfully distinct ways. Everybody probably had some kind of formative experience or exposure with art. And I was curious to hear from both of you about what role art played as you were growing up.
In my case, I suppose I didn't really get to a museum until I was about 18, at the beginning of college. And it was a friend of mine who said, we were going to New York to do something or other. And he said, oh, let's go to the Metropolitan. I said, what's that? The Art Museum. And we went. So I don't have any extensive experience. How did I get to be an art history major as an undergraduate. I went to Fairfield University, a Jesuit school, and art was not a big thing. But one of the things that I was passionate about was fencing. I used to fence about 3 hours a day, 5 days a week, and then intercollegiate competitions on Saturday and Amateur Fencers League of America competitions on Sunday. This was 10 months of the year of my life. And at one point, just going into your junior year, you got to pick electives for the first time. What should I do? And somebody said to me, well, gee, Palko Lukasz, who was the head of the art department, he was the moderator of the fencing club. You should go for art history because Palko, you're a star fencer. That's an easy A for you. I thought, well, yeah, okay. And that's basically why I signed up for art history. And it opened my eyes and enthused me. And I ended up taking courses with him for the 2 years. In fact, my very first trip to Europe was my junior year, with him and 5 other students. So that was an introduction into art, a very kind of side or backdoor way, indirectly. But I just liked it. I liked looking at things. I've always been very visual type of thing. And opening my eyes to Europe, I remember coming home and saying, I've got to get back there.
What do you recall any specific things from that Met visit?
The Met visit, no. I'd say the Met visit was just more the environment. It wasn't that I was intrigued by this work or that work. It was the whole thing. There's artwork around you. Let's face it, an installation in a museum is a design work or an artwork. It was the whole environment that intrigued me at that point. It wasn't until later that I started getting into individual works of art. Even today, when I go in, what interests me a lot is the environment. And it's probably where the museum world really fit me. It's not only that I get to work in one, but I got to create a new one with the new addition to the Chase. So I like that aspect of it. And then individual arcs, that becomes a much more personal thing. I always like to make the point that there is a difference between what you like in quality. And the way I like to describe that division is what I like is all about me. Who am I and how does it fit into my psychology? Whereas when you talk about quality, you're talking about taking some kind of external criteria and applying it to a select group of works of art. So it's not the same. I mean, I always would get upset when students say, oh, well, there's no such thing as quality. I know no, they're different, distinct. And there was a funny little story with Palko Lukasz in the trip to Europe. We had been to Paris and we'd been to a couple of places. We got to Florence. And at the end of the day, we'd have these sessions. We'd sit around and say, okay, now what have you seen? And Palko asked a very interesting question that I've never forgotten. Of everything that you've seen, what would you take home with you? Very specific question. What would you take home with you? And as I thought about it, what would I take home with me? The woman who answered before me says, Michelangelo's David. And I was shocked and I exploded. Michelangelo's David, the thing's 18 feet tall. Would you even want to live in a house big enough to accommodate it? In other words, I was thinking about who I am, where I live, what I could bring into my house because it would mean something to me. Whereas she took it more like, what's the best thing that you've seen so far? And I agree, Michelangelo's David is terrific, but it's not what I would have taken home with me.
What was?
Well, actually, what was I, 17, 18, going on 18, romance in a young man's head. And I had gotten to look at Delacroix and the Romantics, and there was a painting called The Girl in a Graveyard. And it's a beautiful portrait of a young woman in profile with teary eyes in a graveyard where her lover's been dead and buried. It's not one of the great Delacroix, but I really wanted to see it. I actually tracked it down to the 3rd floor somewhere in the Louvre.
It's taken 5 years to find, wave your way through the galleries. I always get lost in there.
Turning to you, Paula, what were your early experiences with art? How did you come to understand it?
Well, I was very lucky. My father and mother were both very interested in the arts. My father had put himself through law school as an actor in the Irish Radio Repertory Theatre. And on Sunday afternoons, a big tradition in Ireland is always to have big Sunday lunches. And sometimes these plays would come on and he would say, oh my God, turn that off. That's dreadful. Oh, it was very funny. He would always recite poetry at the end of the big Sunday lunch. And of course, as children, we were like, oh my God, please don't let our friends knock on the door. Because my father would invite people in, and that was very embarrassing. But before lunch, which my mother always cooked on a Sunday, he would always take us to the Hugh Lane Municipal Gallery of Modern Art when we were children. And there was always a lecture which he made us listen to. I mean, he didn't say you all have to sit there and listen. Would say things like, this would be great to listen to. So I remember very well, we were standing in front of a painting by Renoir called Les Parapluies. The person who was giving the talk was describing the woman at the very front who had long red hair, and then the people behind her, and he described how the image looked and all the diagonals and so on and so forth. And then he said, I think I was about 12, he said, and the seething sexuality that underlines this image is portrayed by. I thought to myself, what does seething sexuality mean? I've never forgotten the way he said it. He said it, it's such, but anyway. So anyway, we continued to go to all of those, and I took a lot of art classes, and I actually did want to go to art school, but my father, when he graduated as a lawyer, founded the Teachers Union of Ireland, which was for vocational and technical teachers. And he told me when I graduated from high school that the National College of Art and Design, which you would call an academy here, not related to a university, had been closed for a couple of years. Everyone was on strike. And he said, it doesn't look like it's going to open at all, because my father also did a lot of negotiations between industries, for industries, between management and the people who were working there. And he said, I don't think it'll open. I think you should go to the university. So I went to the university and did art history instead. But there was no such thing as doing art at university. So they're very, very separate. Now, they have seemed to merge over the years since I've left, because that was a long time ago. But my parents continued to go to every single play at the Abbey Theatre. My father was founding shareholder, which was basically an appointment by the government. It wasn't that he had bought shares in the theatre at all. And then he became chairman of the board of the. So, I mean, there were always these discussions, and my mother ran an 18th century rare book library called Archbishop Marsh's Library. And it was founded by Archbishop Narcissus Marsh in 1701. And he was also the provost of Trinity College. And right across the close, which it's called, the Dean of St. Patrick's lived, and that was Jonathan Swift. And they hated each other's guts. And my mother quoted conversations that nobody says anything as bad to each other today as they did then. So really horrible things. Anyway, my mother wrote a book on the library and many other things. My father wrote several books. So it was always a great kind of atmosphere. And if they weren't interested in what each other were talking about, they would just talk across the table about their own thing.
On the other hand, those Sunday lunches were formidable. It was a formal lunch, and when you were sitting at the table, you better stay engaged. I remember occasions I'd start talking to Paula's sister, somebody next to me, and the next thing I hear from the other end of the table, Russell, now tell me, what were Plato's thoughts on this? You're a classics major. Okay. So it wasn't just me, it was anybody who was drifting. You brought back into the conversation, which was a very interesting.
There was no way anybody could just break down and talk to the person beside them. It had to be a gent. They were called on. So, but I try very hard not to do that.
Paul, so you were dragged to lectures your whole childhood, and you didn't run from the arts screaming?
No, I didn't mind. I loved going to the lecture because there was always a discussion afterwards with my father and my sister and brother and I. And then we would probably start our lunch talking about things like that. We'd pick up my grandmother on the way and blah, blah, blah. And there would be other friends invited. I mean, it was usually about 8 to 10 people. I have one brother and one sister. And guests were included, good friends of my parents. And no, I loved it. I never complained about it. I don't remember my brother or sister doing it. There were lots of things we complained about when my mother experimented with new dishes for lunch or something.
It was almost like a McCarthy salon, really. The Sunday salon.
Well, when my father and mother gave dinner parties, I have to say, I am convinced at this age that my father planned out what was going to be spoken about. He used to go into the dining room for the dinner. This was for their friends, and we were never included in that. But I think he always planned out what was going to be talked about.
Well, I think it's a very older style European thing. Nobody ate and then plopped in front of the television to watch the football game afterwards. And if you were invited to dinner or you were invited to Sunday lunch, you somehow had to think out your party piece. What were you going to contribute? Everybody was there to, in some way, contribute and help entertain everybody else type of thing. They took it seriously, but they didn't make it. It's like the way they got taken to the museum. It was, you have to come or else. It's, well, this will be really fun.
Yeah.
It was like Charles coming across the table. Well, Aristotle and his ascetics said, what do you think of that? So he knew enough about me, and I was a classics major as an undergraduate, to try and engage something that I may know. So I wasn't out in left field. He wasn't trying to put me in a spot. But it's, hey, you probably know something about this. And we did talk about classics and stuff like that. In our family, we didn't do that kind of thing. So this thing about your party piece. Yeah, and some people would come with songs or poetry they'd learned before dinner and recite. So as you were invited to go to somebody's house to dinner, and I think to a certain degree it still happens, you prepared, you thought out, what are you going to contribute in the course of that evening? And that makes it a very different social occasion than, well, let's get together and bring the kids and a couple of pizzas and some beer will be just fine.
I have come to think of this interview situation we're doing with the podcast is kind of like that, trying to return and connect on a deeper level with people in the same ecosystem that you're working in, but have different roles and share that with people who are interested. Oh, you kind of slipped that you were going to go towards studio art there. So, let's circle back.
Well, that was my favorite topic all through school, right to the end. So it was very disappointing. But there weren't any other art schools to go to. So it was just, okay, I'll study history of arts. But I really enjoyed that. I do have to say the Irish and British system of undergraduate college that you do when you do a BA, you do 3 subjects in your first year. And if you want to do honors, you drop 1 and just remain on with 2. It was also incredibly old-fashioned and really strict. So I did French, archaeology, and art history. But the old-fashioned part was that once you'd made that selection when you were 18, you couldn't change anything. So you just had to go with it. So I dropped French and focused on archaeology and art history. Now, my mother used to make these jokes to me, and she was right. So archaeology was very interesting, and at that stage I had a good memory, and I learned it. But archaeology in Ireland is not archaeology in Egypt. Archaeology in Ireland is cold and wet and muddy, and that's not me. I mean, I'm not that sort of person. Well, I smile benignly when people talk about going hiking and here, there, and everywhere. Just not me. I loved art history, though. I absolutely loved it. My main professor was French. Françoise Henri was her name, and she had been an expert actually in early Irish art, Newgrange and high crosses, and she had done a huge amount of work in that area. I just memorized all the stuff for archaeology, so I passed the exams. Never went on a dig, which my mother felt was an absolute disgrace. But I got an honors degree. They had such an old-fashioned system there. And it was ridiculous because you come in at that age and you don't really know what you're going to do. I was listening to a discussion yesterday at the Southern Graphics Conference where Jason had met some fellow alumni. Jason Rule, one of our master printers at Tandem, had met some of his colleagues whom he was at college with here at the University of Wisconsin. Many of them had started as painters, and they had all gone into printmaking. And they were all talking about that. And I was thinking, just as I listened to him talking, I thought there was no way we could have done that.
Well, and when you say that you loved art history, was it the visuals? Was it the stories? Was it the history?
Everything. I
Every-
loved everything about it. Everything. There was nothing I disliked. I loved learning about it. I just loved it.
I found it was also an individual that had a special kind of role. Francois Henri with me, Paco Lukash. I mean, who that man was and how he lived his life and what art meant to him and how he worked around it and how he introduced it to me. That was my door, and I started looking at things almost through his eyes. The same here. I think an individual in a lot of these cases, an inspiration
Can change your
is
life.
very important.
I feel like all the art history curator types that I know can point to a single professor. I can, for sure.
No question.
Yes.
It's the first thing that I feel like you learn in those situations is you're first taught the passion,
Yeah.
and then the content comes after, right?
Yeah. Definitely.
Even though you had to cover all time and all periods of art history, did you focus in on something?
It would no. We focused. It was really the history of European painting, and then they did go back to introduce kind of everything. But that's what we really focused on for the 3 years. I mean, we were introduced to all other aspects, and we had to travel. That was one thing we had to do. We weren't allowed to do our degree. I don't know how they were able to actually do that, but we weren't allowed to unless we had been to 3 European cities. We had to either go to Paris, and we had to pay for it. We could go to Venice and or Rome or Florence and London.
Did you have to write a paper about the trip?
No, we just had to prove that we had done it.
Okay.
The important thing is you don't just become an expert or have a degree of some kind in art based on slides. I mean, experiencing art, and that's what art's all about, is the experience. If you're just looking at reproductions, think of what you're missing. Scale, depth, nuance of color and all of that. So that's all this, I think this professor was trying to do, is say, you have to get out there and you have to look at something and get that experience in addition to your classroom work and your book reading, which is a very good thing. I mean, I remember sitting here and every student I knew, I said, go. I don't care where you go. Just go somewhere and experience and look around you.
Well, the experience of art in the United States is so different than Europe. When I went to Italy with my graduate school class, we took this trip out to Borgo San Sepolcro, where Piero della Francesca was from, to see one painting in one church. I mean, who would do that? I would never do that on my own, frankly. I'm not an Italian Renaissance person, but I mean, you really have to go, and they're so in situ in the church. Like, it's just a totally different experience.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. It's wonderful. I mean, it totally opens your eyes. Russell Henri was great, really, because one of the things she said, you must all bring mirrors with you when you go, so that your neck does not get achy from this holding the mirror to look at everything in the ceiling. And also you won't forget.
That's brilliant.
Yeah, there are a few places that used to actually offer them. I've not seen it in the last decade or so, but you'd come in and if you wanted, they would have a mirror like this that you could carry around with you. If they had ceilings, Venetian palaces, for example, so you could look this way as opposed to trying to do this all the time.
Beyond art, I believe you both found a life-changing experience in Florence.
Ah, yes. Well, then I was a classics major, and then when I finished in 1969, I got a draft call. This was the military draft was still on. This was the height of Vietnam. And I can't say I was necessarily anti military, but I was anti Vietnam. And I also didn't see myself fitting into an army lifestyle. I could see some sergeant, starting to yell at me and me punching him out. That was not a good thing. So I went to my classics professor, what I do? And he says, well, there's Notre Dame Girls High School. They're looking for a Latin teacher, classics major. I said, okay. So down I went, I applied, and by golly, 2 weeks later, I was offered the job to teach Latin. So I took it, and the good thing about it was there was a deferment from the draft for that time. There were so many history majors or English majors, they were a dime a dozen, but a Latin major was a really rare commodity and the ability to teach. So I went but then I went to Europe again between those 2 years. And I came back. I spent, I think it was 1 month in Paris, 1 month in London, and 1 week in Amsterdam. And I came home after first day. My mother said, "Well, you're back." And I said, "Yeah, and I'm going back next year." That type of thing, going to school. And I applied to the embassy then for the University of Florence to do art history. I just loved Florence from what I'd seen. Applied, got in. It's naive on my part. I went to the Italian university and everything was in Italian. But being bilingual, I'm Ukrainian, so my Ukrainian is my first language. I never thought about, didn't think about a second language or another language as another. So yeah, it's just something you do. But that was a bit naive because, getting around, talk to my pals, have a good political argument. Writing a paper on aesthetics is a different story, but it made it through. One of the professors that I did my dissertation with, Carlo del Bravo, was a wonderful character. I always did courses with him for all my time there, but he was of that old upper class generation where they won't modulate their voice, for example. You remember the old Carlo Bolo wine commercials on TV, and it starts with Io sono Carlo Bolo. Because to modulate your voice was to lower your class because of the trope of Italians being kind of strident. So this was going the other way. Carlo del Bravo always spoke in a total monotone. Now, multiply that with a course on Luca della Robbia's panels, the Museo dell'Opera del Duomo. It's been remodeled, but they have 20, 25-foot high ceilings in these rooms that were made out of stone and concrete, and no carpets of anything to absorb any sound. And here's this man in a monotone giving a 2-hour lecture on the humanistic values in these panels by Luca della Robbia. After the class was over, I sat down on a little bench looking at these panels and this voice pops up. "Do you speak English?" And my attitude was, "How did you know?" Because for my first couple of years in Italy, I just didn't speak English at all. I said, "Well, that's your Daily Herald." I said, "That's fine. I never bought an American newspaper when I was here." So I always tell people she picked me up. She was in the class.
Let's hear your side.
That's pretty much how it went. So I have to say, I mean, I listened to this lecture. I was, oh my God, what have I done? I won the scholarship to go and I signed up at the university and I was, what am I going to do? I was very serious, just looking. And there was a Herald Tribune beside him. And I did think
And it was yours.
you had to I did, but I always read the newspaper. That was one thing. I'm a newspaper addict still to this day. Anyway, Russell, after he agreed to speak in English to me, he took me out for a cup of coffee, and that was it.
Oh, no. There you go.
That was how many years ago?
That was 50 years ago. Yeah, we've known each other for a long time.
Yeah.
I want to get to Tandem, but before that, Ben and I were talking about asking you how much Madison and the Chazen and Tandem have changed since you guys got here in the 80s.
Well, when I came, Tandem had just begun. And Bill Weegy, of course, founded Tandem Press. And he had his own press out at his farm. He actually had 2 presses, Jones Road and off Jones Road, because his first press was in Barneveld, which was destroyed by a tornado, that hotel. And he moved then to Arena. And then he convinced the dean to set up a press. He felt that what he had learned at the university when he was a student, they had devoted 2 faculty lines to paying visiting artists, those salary lines. And he felt being exposed to really well-known artists, I think Roy Lichtenstein was here, a lot of very well-known people, had been amazing. And so ultimately his thought process basically was, you can be taught the techniques by your teachers, your professors, but to actually get a sense of creativity, you really have to see somebody doing it. And you have to see people not only succeeding, but failing and moving on. And at the same time, in the 1980s, a lot of artwork was selling and it looked very exciting. And he felt that he could basically raise the money, sell the prints, bring in students, and it would work really, really well. His first idea was to start a subscription program. So he started a subscription program, and in the first week, 10 of his friends bought subscriptions. And for $10,000, you could get $20,000 worth of prints. So that enabled him to hire a curator and rent a building. The difficulty was that $20,000 worth of prints is an awful lot of prints. And I think the whole thinking in the beginning was that everyone would resubscribe, but that's a difficult thing to do. So when I was appointed, the money had run out and they wanted to do something completely different. It was a brilliant idea, there is no question. And
How romantic idea. In terms of the money, okay, and it's a very creative individual, but really much the artist. Whereas when you're running it, even though you're on university campus and the university requires you to raise your money and pay your costs, it's business.
However, I think what happened then was that we just needed to find other ways to promote the press. And that was what we did. I'm not afraid to ask people, what do people do? How do people sell art? Where do people sell art? I mean, I'm not afraid to do that. And I'm not afraid to do fundraising. We've got a whole combination of things going now. Basically, we found out all the fairs, we found out how to get into them. We got involved with people who did that. So that was sort of administration again. But we worked on bringing in the artists, and the artists were terrific, and it was very exciting. And the more exciting it got, the more fun. But there were down years when the people I had to negotiate about not letting Tandem go was the university. They were from time to time very worried that, can we do this and will this work? And it was a lot of convincing, yes, give it time. I mean, Russell did say to me, the longer you hang in, Paula, meaning Tandem, the longer it will be there. It was just basically, don't have the fear, just keep going. And now we have those three things working for us. We really have worked on raising funds and getting things endowed and getting into art fairs. And then I think the world has changed so much. I mean, we used to have to book calls when Russell was living in Italy and wait 8 hours for it to be put through. Now you send an email and someone gets it in 10 seconds. And social media, I mean, what we're doing today, talking about having a podcast, and you can turn on any of these podcasts and learn fascinating things. And the thing of promoting things on other platforms.
What was it like when you began working with artists who could talk back?
My doctorate in Italy was 15th century Florentine painting and its relationship to human. It was in Luca della Robbia, with a side to a few others. And you come to the States and you realize the museum world is different. If you watch how art history is taught in Italy and both places in Europe, they all specialize in the art of their country. So if you're Italian, you're from Florence, you're usually specializing in Florence because, my God, there it all is. If you're Venetian, you specialize Venetian art because you've got the real stuff around you. So that was fascinating. Now, it didn't take very long to come back and realize I can't do that here. And then getting into the museum world, I said, okay, audience is important. Who's going to come? And 15th century Florentine, well, it was an art historian who touched on 15th century Italian, but no, otherwise, what are they teaching? What are they teaching in the art department? Because the university museum, and ultimately, although you're a broad audience and there is a community service mission, you've got to serve the students first. What do they want to see? Most of them, especially the art department, is so much larger than the art history department. And the answer was, well, what's contemporary? One of the last big exhibitions was contemporary China, because we had a professor teaching Chinese art, and I just got so intrigued. And then I had an early friendship with an artist, Xu Bing. He and I, Weiwei and Xu Bing, are probably the two top names. Xu Bing is much less politically involved, but Xu Bing, I gave him his first exhibition in 1990 because his girlfriend at the time, who was a graduate student here in the library science program, and we're after Tiananmen Square. He had been an assistant professor in Central Academy of Fine Arts. And he had to get out because of politics. So she brought him here, and then I get a call from Ray Gleckler in the art department, who is a wood engraver. And Ray says, I got this Chinese artist here. He doesn't speak any English, but his girlfriend's who he was with, she's pretty good at transplant. I don't know what to do with him. Do you want to talk to him? I said, sure. So he said, and because Ray was a wood engraver, Shubing's woodcuts were wood engravings. And so over comes Big with his girl. We spent about 3 hours together. And I said to him, I'd like to do a show of your work. Never forgot that. And we say, Prince, if Bing was in this country as opposed to China, because he ultimately became the assistant director of the Academy, Central Academy of Fine Arts. And he said, do a show of contemporary art Chinese. I said, Bing, I don't know anything about contemporary Chinese art. I'm not about to start doing research and reading. He said, but you offered me a show. What did you see in my work? Why did you offer me a show? Well, I said, well, the quality, the ideas, doing a show was doing a way of learning and getting in there. That's something that I saw was rich and deep. He says, why don't you take the same attitude and do it with contemporary Chinese art? And then he, using his position, opened doors where Chinese artists, Bing said, gee, so-and-so's coming by, let me, why don't you meet with them, take them to your studio? So I got around Beijing that I wouldn't have met otherwise. So it was fascinating experience. So as much as I love my Italy, and I miss it, there's so much going on in the world, and the offerings are so wide. We can't possibly cover all of it. I wish I could.
Thank you to the internet, right?
Yes, absolutely right.
Paul, Ben is going to ask the final question, but before that, I'm pretty sure there are artists who want to know how artists get to make work at Tandem.
Well, they should just send us some information about their work. That would be the thing that they should do. We actually have an artistic advisory committee, and we review the work twice a year. We're happy to look at anybody's work, so no problem whatsoever. We have the staff look at it in conjunction with professors in the art department. Because we work very closely with the art department, we have 2 fellowships that we have where we give 2 students full funding. But that would be the way to do it, basically. And the other thing would be to approach us when we're at an art fair, because we're a little off the beaten track here, depending on where people live. We are going to be doing the Expo Chicago from the 4th through the 7th of April, and then your fair in Baltimore, which is at the end of April.
End of April, yep.
And I think that's an occasion where we meet a lot of people, and if people are in that particular area, they could come and see us.
And of course, in New York in the fall.
New York at the International Fine Brick Dealers Association Fair. And that is at the
Javits Center.
Center.
Yeah.
And right up in the River Pavilion.
Right.
Yeah.
That's something Ben and I have talked about a lot, which is print people are the nicest people. And that when you come to a fair, you should never be afraid to say, hi, I'm an artist, and engage in conversation with you and the curators that are with you, Sona and Mishka.
Yeah.
And that you're not going to get the snotty down the nose, don't talk to me, I'm working thing. That the print people are like, yeah, let's talk. What are you up to?
Yeah.
So don't hesitate.
But sometimes there are 2 things. Sometimes somebody might be trying to close a sale. They don't want to be,
don't poke in that.
they don't want to be, interrupted at that point. I would suggest the best times to approach people at art fairs are on Sunday afternoons when basically nothing is happening. And people will give you lots of time.
Good advice.
But on the opening night,
not opening.
Not the opening night, or early in the morning, if they seem to be deeply engaged in the conversation, it's probably serious and something might come of it. Just do a little tour and come back.
Take a lap.
Take a lap. Some people are very shy, and some dealers can be a little bit off-putting. And so I think just do a little lap. I think that would be the main advice I would give. But we're happy to look at anybody's work.
Yep. Great. Thank you.
And Paula, we'll give you the last word. You said that this work still fascinates you. And I just was curious what keeps you coming back every day?
I love it. I basically, first of all, I love working. That's one thing. I love the fact that we're working with artists all the time. And I have met so many incredible artists. And I did use that word fascinated because I am really fascinated by how things are made. Just looking at, in the studio at the moment, today is Friday. It's spring break, I know. But David comes in at 8 o'clock and he does this weaving of these beads all day long and he never even looks up.
For Jeffrey Gibson's works.
For Jeffrey Gibson's works. And I think I see that intensity, that I see that in all the printers. I see that there's just this can-do attitude. Never give up on what the artist wants. Let's see if we can do it a different way, if it isn't working the right way. We were all of us yesterday were watching the students printing a very large print at Tandem Press. It was supposed to be happening outside with the printing by a steamroller. And what was very interesting was it started raining and everything was getting wet. And so it wasn't working very well. And the steamroller actually didn't have enough pressure for what the students wanted to do. And so the printers at Tandem made a suggestion that all the students should come in and just use our studio, which was not the original plan. And we have a very large press that's 5 by 12 feet. And so everything was then placed on that press. And many of the students hadn't seen a press like that work. Ultimately, the impression was much better because they were able to adjust the pressure to get a wonderful print made. And there was tremendous excitement. How many people go to work and see something like that every day? See something that went wrong, see people make a change about it, and then see a better solution ultimately. And it really did work in the end, and it was very exciting. And I have to say, most days at Tandem Press are like that. So that's why I'm fascinated and love it. But I will have to go at some stage. I should say that.
Ben and I talk about how we both would love to work in a shop at some point because you make it sound so exciting.
It is exciting.
Yeah.
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 Very exciting.
Right. Well, thank you both for talking with us. It's been it's been a treat for us, and we hope the listeners enjoy it too.
We do too.
Hey everyone, thanks so much for listening to this episode featuring Paula and Russell Panczenko. If you've made it this far, you're going to have to listen to me thank all the peoples. Thank you to Russell and Paula for being terrific subjects and crack storytellers. I really appreciate it. And thank you also to Ben for being an incredible co-host. I also need to thank Michael Diamond for the use of his original music. This is a new track for us, so I hope you like it. And I don't know, I think that might be it. We'll see you next time.